The growing rivalry between the United States and China has taken a new and alarming turn, as both superpowers expand their competition from economic and military domains into the vast frontier of outer space. In recent years, Washington and Beijing have poured unprecedented resources into developing advanced space capabilities, ranging from satellite constellations and space-based communications to anti-satellite weapons and lunar exploration missions. While publicly both nations emphasize peaceful use of space and scientific cooperation, behind-the-scenes intelligence assessments, military reports, and policy documents reveal a rapidly escalating contest for strategic dominance. American defense officials argue that China's space ambitions are not merely scientific but deeply tied to its military modernization agenda, while Chinese analysts accuse the United States of seeking to weaponize outer space and maintain hegemony. The result is a dangerous cycle of suspicion and response, raising fears that the cosmos, once seen as a neutral domain of exploration, could soon become the stage for a new great power conflict. One of the central flashpoints is the militarization of satellite networks, which are critical for communications, navigation, surveillance, and even the command and control of modern weapons systems. The United States relies heavily on its Global Positioning System, GPS, reconnaissance satellites, and space-based early warning systems to maintain global military superiority. China, meanwhile, has rapidly built its own Beidou navigation system, launched dozens of reconnaissance satellites, and demonstrated technologies capable of jamming or blinding enemy satellites. Recent reports suggest that China has tested ground-based lasers, cyber tools, and even co-orbital systems that could disable or destroy U.S. assets in orbit. American officials, in response, have intensified efforts to harden satellites, deploy more resilient constellations, and expand the jurisdiction of the U.S. Space Force. This tit-for-tat dynamic mirrors the Cold War nuclear arms race, where each side sought to outpace the other, but in this case the battlefield is not on Earth's surface but thousands of miles above it. The competition is not limited to Earth's orbit. Both Washington and Beijing have outlined ambitious goals for the Moon, Mars, and beyond, framing these as steps towards scientific discovery but also as potential avenues for resource extraction and strategic outposts. The United States has rallied allies under the Artemis Accords, aiming to establish a framework for lunar exploration and possible mining of resources such as water ice, which could support long-term human presence and fuel production. China, partnered with Russia, is pushing its own vision of an international lunar research station, with plans to land astronauts on the Moon by the early 2030s. Analysts warn that these parallel projects could trigger disputes over territory, resource claims, and rules of conduct, particularly as no universally binding legal framework exists to regulate extraterrestrial activities beyond the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. If rival camps emerge, with each great power establishing its own spheres of influence in space, the seeds of confrontation could grow into full-fledged conflict, turning celestial bodies into the next geopolitical chessboard. The broader implications of a potential US-China space conflict are profound, not just for the two countries but for the entire world. A war in space would not be confined to rockets and satellites. It could cripple global communications, disrupt banking systems, interfere with civilian navigation, and trigger catastrophic cascades of orbital debris that render large portions of space unusable for decades. The destruction of even a handful of satellites could cause chain reactions known as the Kessler syndrome, creating long-lasting hazards for all nations, including those uninvolved in the conflict. Diplomats, scientists, and security experts are therefore urging both powers to pursue arms control agreements, codes of conduct, and confidence-building measures before tensions spiral out of control. Yet, as history has shown, when rival superpowers perceive existential stakes and strategic advantage, rational appeals often struggle to prevail. Whether the United States and China can avoid repeating the patterns of terrestrial rivalry in space remains one of the defining questions of the 21st century, with consequences reaching far beyond Earth itself. One of the central flashpoints in this looming confrontation is the militarization of satellite networks, which have become indispensable for both commercial activity and military operations. The United States, whose military reach spans the globe, relies on its constellation of satellites for real-time intelligence, missile detection, navigation for troops and aircraft, and secure communications among its global bases. The Global Positioning System, GPS, developed and operated by the U.S. military, is the backbone not only of American defense but of civilian commerce worldwide, enabling everything from rideshare apps to financial transfers.
China, recognizing this strategic dependency, has poured vast resources into developing its own Beidou satellite navigation system, which became fully operational in 2020 and now rivals GPS in accuracy and coverage.
Beyond navigation, China has launched reconnaissance satellites, experimental spaceplanes, and systems designed to interfere with or even disable American assets. Western intelligence reports suggest Beijing has tested ground-based lasers that can temporarily blind satellites, radio frequency jammers capable of disrupting signals, and co-orbital satellites that can maneuver close to others in orbit, raising fears they could be used to attack or capture them. The United States has not stood idle in the face of these developments. Successive administrations have funded more resilient satellite constellations, invested in rapid launch capabilities to replace disabled systems, and emphasized defensive and offensive measures under the Space Force. The dynamic is reminiscent of the Cold War nuclear arms race, with each side attempting to deter the other through technological superiority while simultaneously preparing for the possibility of confrontation. Yet the consequences of miscalculation in orbit may be even more devastating, as the destruction of even a few satellites could create clouds of debris that endanger all spacecraft, civilian and military alike, for decades to come. Beyond Earth's orbit, the US-China competition has extended to the Moon and beyond, raising the stakes further. Both nations have outlined ambitious programs for lunar exploration, with Washington leading a coalition of allies under the Artemis Accords and Beijing aligning with Moscow and other partners to build what it calls an international lunar research station. At first glance, these efforts appear scientific, focused on astronomy, geology, and the dream of sending humans to Mars. Yet behind the lofty language lies a struggle for strategic positioning.
The Moon is not just a symbol of human aspiration, it contains resources that could prove critical for future space economies and military logistics.
Water ice trapped in lunar craters can be converted into oxygen for breathing and hydrogen for rocket fuel, potentially making the Moon a refueling station for deep space missions.
Rare earth minerals, vital for electronics and advanced weaponry, may also exist in abundance. The prospect of mining these resources raises difficult legal and political questions. The 1967 Outer Space Treaty, signed by both the US and China, prohibits claims of sovereignty but is vague on resource extraction, leaving a gray area that each side is eager to exploit. American officials argue that the Artemis Accords provide a framework for responsible resource use, while China and Russia dismiss them as a unilateral attempt to impose US rules on the global community. The risk is that parallel projects could create rival blocks on the lunar surface, with zones of influence resembling colonial spheres carved out on Earth centuries ago. If astronauts from competing powers find themselves working in close proximity on the Moon, mistrust and accidents could quickly escalate into confrontation, transforming humanity's greatest frontier into another battlefield of geopolitics. The broader implications of a potential US-China space conflict are profound, not only for the two superpowers but for the entire global community that depends on safe, reliable, and cooperative access to outer space. A war in orbit would not resemble conventional conflicts on Earth, it would be swift, destructive, and devastatingly indiscriminate. Satellites destroyed in combat could unleash cascading debris clouds, a phenomenon known as the Kessler syndrome, which could render entire orbits unusable for generations, crippling weather forecasting, global communications, and international trade. Civilian airlines, shipping companies, emergency responders, and billions of individuals using smartphones would feel the impact almost immediately. Financial markets, which rely on precise timing signals from satellites, could face chaos, while militaries dependent on secure navigation and communication would be blinded. For these reasons, experts across scientific, diplomatic, and defense communities are urging both Washington and Beijing to negotiate arms control agreements, transparency measures, and codes of conduct to prevent space from becoming the next theater of war. Yet the history of great power rivalry offers little comfort. When states perceive existential stakes, rational appeals often give way to competition. The US and Soviet Union came close to catastrophe multiple times during the Cold War despite recognizing the dangers of nuclear war, and some fear the same cycle may repeat in space. The question, therefore, is not only whether the United States and China can avoid open conflict in orbit, but whether humanity as a whole can rise above the destructive patterns of terrestrial politics. If cooperation fails and mistrust prevails, the heavens may cease to be a realm of wonder and discovery, and instead become the arena where the next great conflict begins, a scenario with consequences too grave for the world to ignore.